and I'm hoping that you see a full screen PowerPoint slide, title slide. Is that correct? Great. Then I will start. Right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to the OR Society for their support. Thanks to the System Dynamics Society for additional support. Thanks to each and every one of you for coming along. Quite intimidating, actually, but Etienne and I are also very pleased. Right, well, there's no way of hiding it. Yes, we're system dynamicists. We think that system dynamics is kind of like a problem structuring method at times. It's maybe more towards the hard end, so it's a bit like decision analysis, decision conferencing, perhaps, but there are still many points of common interest. Now, this is going to be an odd talk in that basically it's an exploration of an area. It's about an area that we got interested in and tried to understand, tried to find out about. And I'm going to talk about how we found our way into it. Then I'm going to hand over to Etienne, who's going to present our attempt to make a contribution to the area that we hope you find interesting. So in outline, I'm going to talk in section 1 about the focus of the work and the arc of the this two-handed talk. In section 2, we'll express our concerns about the behavioural turn in operational research. Then we'll have a bit of a restart. We'll step back and think a bit more about what the behavioural turn means and how it might apply to system dynamics. Then in section 4, we're going to show in detail how system dynamics is in fact already interested, has always been interested in what we now think of as behavioural phenomena. And we're going to do that in a number of ways, using examples and eventually a mind map. Then I'm going to hand over to Etienne because he's going to describe how, this is section 5, we came up with something better than this mind map. We propose a systematic framework for thinking about the process of system dynamics and for you to use that to explore behavioral issues that arise in the different areas and activities that we get involved in. In 6, he's going to show how we use that framework to talk about what behavioral system dynamics is, what it might be, and what it can deliver. And then we'll end with a challenge for us. Okay, there we go. So by way of introduction, the behavioural turn is in full swing. In some areas, it's been in full swing for a long time. If you go to finance and economics, it's a pretty standard thing. Psychology, arguably. It's a very vibrant, very active area, papers, talks, conferences. And my goodness, you do find interest in a very wide variety of areas. This one surprised me. I really ought to find out what that means, but it certainly looks interesting. The idea seems interesting and relevant to many things, so we started reading about it and thinking about it. And here are our initial thoughts. By way of the arc that we're about to travel, just a bit of a warning. We didn't like everything that we found, right? But we took a deep breath and we looked at it in depth, and we end up with a positive view. Okay, just so you know the arc of things. So let's start. These are some critical reflections on the behavioural turn in OR, and we got worried about some things. And again, a warning about what we're going to say, because you might think we're looking a bit cynical, a bit quizzical, a bit assertively cynical about this. No, eventually we don't. We do think this behavioural turn is worthwhile. We do give it a thumbs up, and we're going to try to offer some positive thoughts in the area relating to system dynamics. Okay, let's roll the clock back a bit. In 2013, 2014, I was part of a UK OR Society initiative. I've just got, oh, no, internet's okay. I was part of a UK OR Society initiative called Fostering Behavioural OR, and we were investigating whether behavioural OR was of interest to members. So we had meetings and we gave talks and we swapped ideas. I remember a meeting where I gave a talk about how behavioural ideas apply to lots of aspects of SD. 2016, a Palgrave book came out of that, OR, and the ORSC is part of this, I think. But then I remember in 2014, there was a plenary session at the 2014 conference. And I gave a talk amongst other people, and it got a very lukewarm response. And I thought, well, maybe this is just me. But actually, as you can see, there were other people there, really rather good people who gave talks on the topic. And we all got a pretty lukewarm response from the audience. And I went away kind of worried. The audience didn't seem to think there was anything of much interest here. So I was concerned. I subsequently found out I was not alone. John Brocklesby, on the other side of the planet, made this remark about there are members of the OR community who remain unconvinced, about what Bohr can actually offer. And that leads to three worries that we eventually came to about behavioural operational research, and they're kind of related. First of all, it's not really clear what this thing is. What is the definition of behavioural OR? We went looking for definitions. Here's one. Behavioural OR is something to do with behavioural aspects. Okay. Here's another one. The second one said that behavioural OR had two main streams. That sounds good. And one of them is to do with human behaviour, and the other one is to do with behavioural aspects. Now, this might just be me being a mathematician or something, or being about anal retentive. But I just kind of think with definitions, it's better not to put on the right-hand side the thing that you're trying to define on the left-hand side, because things get complicated. But look, what do I know? Writing X equals X, it kind of feels like that. But look, she got away with it when she said that Brexit means Brexit. So, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, because when you read through these articles, it is pretty clear that what territory is that the people are interested in and are excited about. It emerges. It's about rationality and people departing from rationality because of foibles and fallacies and idiosyncrasies and shortcut heuristics, all the things that humans actually do. And by the way, you do also get some very, very clear definitions. We like the one in Kai Becker's paper in EJOR. It's lengthy, but it's very good. But it's a challenge to us. We should be clear about what we mean if we're going to try to contribute anything here, and we will try to do that. But that was our first concern, all right, definitional. Second concern was the breadth of what people are talking about under this heading. Look at the topics discussed in behavioural OR streams at conferences. Very varied. They're all good things. They're all interesting things. But there are things that we've been researching for a while now, and suddenly they're behavioural operational research. Not sure about this kind of overarching thing. We worry about that. It reminded us of the criticism that Vandenberg made about some social theories. He said that they're of little substance, but they nevertheless have a, quote, grim determination to blanket social reality with a vast conceptual quilt, leaving nothing exposed. And we thought, it kind of feels like that. Well, maybe it's just a broad church. It's just a broad church, and broad churches are good. That's that, aren't they? Well, maybe a church is too broad, the ceiling might fall down. So we might want to think about that. And finally, our final concern was originality. We're not sure what is new here. Okay, so cute as he is, that infant is actually not that young if he's behavioural OR. Now, there's an acceptance of this in places. If you go to the OR Society Behavioural OR Special Interest Group, you can find there a quote: Bohr does not represent a revolution of the field. The field of OR has been aware of the relevance of behavioural issues and might be said, nice phrase this, might be said to have danced around them ever since the 1980s. And Franco and Hämäläinen, in their contribution, push back to work by Churchman and Ackoff in the 70s. They mention work by Dutton and Walton and work by Lawrence in the mid-1960s. So the roots of Bohr go back. Well, how far back do they go? There's actually a good parlor game here. We'd offer earlier in the 1960s, I think Miser's work, Forrester's work. You can go back further. Trist, Imrie and Bamforth, the socio-technical systems work in the 1950s. Also, I couldn't help noticing that in World War II, Blackett's group at Coastal Command had two communications experts. I wonder what they did. I should find out more about this. But anyway, there's a question of what is new here. For operational researchers in the UK and in the rest of Europe, they think they've been doing stuff like this for a while, which maybe explains that conference reaction that we got. So we need to ask, what new thing does the behavioural turn bring? And we would need to be clear about that if we're going to try to make a contribution. Anyway, these are the three things, definition, breadth, and originality that we kind of worried about when we got into this. Also, I thought they'll like us if we show a cute baby. Anyway, let's calm down a bit. We tried to calm down a bit, take a big step back and think about the basic idea, how it relates to operational research and how it might relate to system dynamics. Okay, big step back all the way to the whole solar system. So until the early 17th century, the established model of the universe was the Ptolemaic system, and this had the sun, the moon, and the planets all circling around the Earth and held in great crystal spheres. But early in 1610, Galileo Galilei used one of the telescopes that he had improved, and he pointed it at Jupiter. And he saw something like this, which is what I was actually looking at a couple of months ago. I had the same opportunity. Jupiter with bright stars in a line. In fact, he saw this, and these are the notes. These are Galileo Galilei's actual notes that he made in January, February 1610. As he saw these stars moving around Jupiter, is how he perceived it. And they're moons. They are rotating around Jupiter. He called them the Medici stars. We would call them the Galilean moons. And they do two extraordinary things to your worldview. They say that the Earth is not the center of all motion. And also, there can't be any great crystal spheres because these things would be smashing through them. This is extraordinary, and it's there for anyone to see. Now, this is an extraordinary thing because that the telescope is a doorway to a new way of thinking about the world, to new knowledge. Anyone can use a telescope and rationally they can see for themselves and think for themselves, and bang, that's it. They change their entire worldview. They change their fundamental view of the universe. Yeah. Right. Well, in Brecht's Life of Galileo, we see something of the problem that you have there. Galileo is talking to his mathematician friend about how people will react to his new idea. Look, Segredo, I believe in humanity, which means to say, I believe in human reason. His friend is not so sure. Well, then let me tell you something. I don't. 40 years spent amongst human beings has again and again brought it home to me that they are not open to reason. And I think we all know the trouble Galileo got into because of his approach. But that idea about rationality and how people resist it or depart from it or fail in it gets us into the territory of behavioral effects. How did that idea get into operational research? Well, when we think of the behavioral turn, we think of Tversky and Kahneman doing decision theory kind of things. And in 1974, their paper in Science, Judgment Under Uncertainty, recorded the results of their giving high school students 5 seconds to estimate that and write it down. Now, the answer is 40,320, but the student's median answer was 512. Really quite different. They asked a different group in 5 seconds to calculate this, which is, of course, the same thing, but presented differently, and it produces a different median guess. This is interesting. Now, Tversky and Kahneman thought, right, look, what people might be doing here is something like anchor and adjustment. They are guessing where things are going from the first few digits, the anchor, and then they're adjusting when the other digits come in, but they haven't really got time to process them as well. And they're not adjusting enough. And that might explain it because, of course, people are then anchoring on 1, 2, 3, 4 or 8, 7, 6, 5, and that might explain the different numbers. Okay. Now, look at the structure of the argument that they're making here. They're saying, 1, people depart from reason. Okay, they are not doing the right thing. And point 2, it's empirically observable that they do that in a certain way. The first guesses are lower than the second guesses. And third and last, there is an explanation for the phenomenon based on the presentation of the situation and a theory, here psychological. So those 3 steps: error, empirical observation, explanation about human foibles or failures. That's the step into OR, or for us, a first step into OR, but it gets us to this brilliant paper by Hämäläinen, Luoma, and Saarinen. Okay. Now, for 20 years, system dynamicists have been asking questions about stock and flow relationships, what we think of as mental integration. Here is an example, Linda Booth Sweeney and John Sturman in 2000, with the bathtub task. You give people the shape of the inflow to the bathtub, the outflow from the bathtub, and you ask them to sketch the volume of water in the bathtub. And subjects, generally speaking, are not very good at this, right? And there are various ideas for why they aren't. Generally, system dynamicists deduce that people can't deal with accumulation very well, but that means system dynamics computer simulation modeling is needed. So we've all got work to do. Okay. Here's another example from 2002. It's called the department store task. Here you have an inflow and an outflow of people into a store. Now, most subjects can answer questions about the flows, question 1 and 2, but many fewer can answer questions about the stock, the people in the actual store, questions 3 and 4. Now, Hämäläinen, Luoma, and Saarinen came along and looked at this and suggested, well, maybe there are some behavioral issues here. The curves trigger the availability heuristic. The option boxes are a cue which prompts certain responses, right? Makes it too easy to say can't be determined, perhaps. And also, people are just cognitively overwhelmed by all of this and the time restriction that you give them. So as an alternative, in 11 experiments, they changed the questions to try to remove some of these, and they encouraged people to think more deeply and at greater length about the problem, and they sometimes smoothed the graph. Now, this led to great improvements in the responses to the stock-related question. Now, what Hämäläinen et al. Concluded was 2 things. 1, it's not that people can't deal with accumulation. It is that the presentation and the cues embedded in accumulation-related questions can significantly influence people's ability to deal with accumulation. That's more sophisticated, that's more subtle. Secondly, and this was the main purpose of their paper in a way, that behavioral effects apply broadly across operational research. It's interesting that they used a system dynamics derived situation to argue for all of OR. Now, for us, wonderful paper, it cuts right to the heart of system dynamics, our field. Right? And we thought, no, there's more going on. It's what provoked us to explore this area more, seeing how the behavioral turn might apply to system dynamics. And we think it applies to a lot. All right. System dynamics has always had a large number of ideas with a behavioral feel to them. I mean, the very broad one, people are not very good at managing complex systems, is a behavioral kind of insight. That people do not behave like Homo economicus. This is a very well established idea in system dynamics. And also a rather positive idea, how people can play with a model together and learn about things with some assistance, with the right model, with some process elements put in, a positive behavioral issue. Now, those 3 ideas are all in Industrial Dynamics, Forrester's book, 1961. Now, Hämäläinen et al. Say some of this, but to us as system dynamicists, they don't push it far enough, right? We think there's a vast range of issues. And to begin to scope out those issues, we first of all used Daniel Kahneman's rather pop idea of system 1 and system 2. Some of you will be familiar with this. There are ways of thinking about what to do in a given situation. System 1 is a very rapid way of doing things. It's based on gut feel and intuition. People use shortcuts and heuristics. They draw on past knowledge. They do pattern matching. It's a great system to use if you're trying to escape a predator on the African savannah, and we're all stuck in bodies that are basically tuned to help us do that. And sometimes being able to react well in an emergency is extremely important. But Kahneman contrasts this with system 2. System 2 is slower. It's much more consciously reasoning, consciously deliberative. It takes effort to look at a situation and come to a slow evaluation about the most sensible thing to do. Now, you can look at those two ways of thinking and apply it to a range of phenomena, well known, very well known in system dynamics. But here's a big table. This, by the way, is an early version of the table. I think this is my one. Etienne and I went back to it and reworked it, and our joint version in the paper is better. And that's a phrase you hear again and again here. So the paper one is better, but this makes the point. Let's start at the first one, and I'm not going to do all of these, don't worry. The classic limits to growth problem. People use a policy, keep using a policy that ceased to work, right? System 1 kind of explains that in terms of, well, we experience this helpful compounding effect, a reinforcing loop. It's the only thing that's around, so let's keep doing it. Let's keep pushing on it. System 2 draws back and says, well, yeah, there is this compounding effect, but previous success seems to have hit some kind of limit. So maybe we need to draw back and think about what that limit is and see that as the source of explanation of system behavior, system trajectory over time, and maybe think about tackling that limit. You can see people doing system 1 make the error in the observed phenomenon. People who've persuaded over to system 2 might be able to manage that system differently. The second one is the classic example, the founding example of system dynamics, really, beer game. Humans make supply chains oscillate. Now, there are all sorts of increasingly sophisticated ways of thinking about this, and I'm aware that my chum Rogelio Oliva is joining us, and he's done some really great, more sophisticated work on this. So, Rogelio, I'm just doing the basic version here. We think we can explain the supply chain oscillations as people not properly keeping track of past orders, right? Not making that a priority or just being crunched because of time pressure. And that's a very system 1-y kind of explanation. A system 2 approach to this would be, oh no, past orders are important. We need to keep track of the supply line, when making our reorder decision. But this is much more contemplative and broad and slow. Now we can move down that table, which actually moves us up the kind of conceptual ladder of what system dynamics is interested in. And at the end, we get what's the observed phenomena? Humans resist the use of modeling for policy analysis. We've all been there, haven't we? A system 1 explanation for that is, well, models behave strangely, so I don't believe them. I don't get it immediately. I don't understand, so I'm out of here. And also, no, I don't want to do this at all anyway. I think my gut feeling decision making is what makes me an heroic manager, and it's a sound guide to management. Whereas we would say, in a way, the system dynamics project is a system 2 approach to that. Well, no, surprising behavior does occur. It can be quite hard to understand, but you can learn about it and improve your intuition, and modeling can help you do this, can help you interrogate your own ideas, share your ideas, and help groups of people create a commitment to action. Okay. Now, for us, this approach, the left-hand side column, is stuff that we know about in system dynamics and have known for decades. The system 1, system 2 approach kind of gets you in the zone, and it suggests the amazing breadth of applicability of behavioral ideas to system dynamics. But in fact, there's lots more. And from that, there was an initial attempt to sketch the territory of system dynamics that a behavioral turn applies to. Right, we thought it needs some structure. So here's a mind map which gives some structure to this. As systems analysts, we will talk here about 4 areas, and there are behavioral phenomena concerning each of these areas. But the areas are how we encounter the world, the mental models that we have of the world, what we're going to need to put inside any formal models that we build, computer models or just maps, and how we then work with those formal models and encounter the world again. So what we then did, and we will outline this a little, give some examples of the phenomena that we just tried to hang on to, this mind map. So encountering the world starts with experiencing it, right? We don't know what's out there. There's missing information about it. There's delayed information about it. We don't always look at what's there. And that very rapidly gets us to phenomena, behavioral phenomena arising in mental models. There's a lot here, mental models that we have and how we use them. So here is the Hämäläinen et al. Phenomenon. The work on stock and flow relationships. Mental integration is difficult to process unaided with our mental models. Here, you might say, is all of the work, the findings by Derner and Axelrod, that people tend to have short causal chains. A influences B influences C in their mental models. Very short, no feedback. And that's what they use as the basis of their decision making. There's a behavioral issue there, or behavioral phenomena there, about the nature of mental models. Over here are the odd things about human behavior that we have to represent in a formal model. So here we find issues relating to how use of information is represented in models. So rather than pretending we're Homo economicus, John Moorcroft showed some decades ago that we can use Herbert Simon's ideas about bounded rationality, and that's what we need to put into models to represent real decision making. We also may have to build into models the idea that people might learn. They might change their goals. They might alter the information sources that they use and the weights that they attach to different flows of information. In other words, people are active social agents, and some of that may need to be included inside our models. And down here, we find issues relating to people working with formal models. Lots of stuff here, all in the literature. All this stuff is in the literature. So people being overconfident in their intuition, which leads them to think, I don't need any modeling. I'm fine. Thank you very much indeed. Or the experiences and anecdotes about how to work with a group of people to elicit information for modeling. Famous paper, Scripts for Group Model Building. Also, some very useful work on what we do at the end of modeling, how we need to summarize insights, how we need to chunk model insights into a t-shirt slogan, right? To help people remember it, to help people use it, to help people convey it to other people, help people use these ideas in their encounters with the world and how they go back and influence the world. Now, we draw all of this together. There are lots and lots. All of these things we can find in the literature, stuff that we're interested in. Lots of phenomena of interest to systems analysis seem to be behavioral in nature. I mean, here's Forrester, our social systems, far more counterintuitive and harder to understand than technological systems. 1970 paper, counterintuitive behavior of social systems. Behavior here means trajectories over time, but that word counterintuitive, that's a behavioral phenomenon if ever I've heard one. Now, when I first got into this and came up with an earlier version of this diagram, I thought, well, this is quite interesting, but it's not really working. It shows a lot of detail, but it doesn't really organize it in the way that helps us think intervention, and I don't know enough about this. It needs a better structure, and I need to think further about this with someone who knows more about it. So Etienne and I got together and decided to push this work forward, and at this point we will get rid of this nasty map and show you something better. I will stop sharing and hope to hand over to my good Dutch colleague Etienne Rouet, who will complete things.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me and see my screen. Great. Before going into content, very welcome on my behalf as well. My name is Etienne Rouet. I'm based in the Netherlands at Radboud University, and most of my research is on the effect of modeling, among which system dynamics modeling, on behavior of people, and also on how to capture behavior in models. But before I go into the actual content, I'd like to point out that David had all the fun examples, a picture of a baby, and is a native speaker. So expect everything to go downhill from here. Having said that, in trying to build a more systematic model of the phenomena that we just talked about, David and I decided to distinguish between two things. One is an entity that remains in existence over some period of time. It could refer to the external world, or it could be an internal cognitive representation. And the other one is actions or influences of entities on one another. And what we basically try to do is to render the mind map that we just saw a little bit more systematic, starting from the real world, which for the purpose of our paper and this presentation, we'll just define as the thing that doesn't go away if you stop thinking about it. And the first thing to note is that we can never experience this in its entirety. If you just think about sound, for instance, then the human auditory apparatus is just not equipped to hear sounds that are lower than 20 hertz or higher than 20,000 hertz. So you just perceive only part of what's going on. But by perceiving regularities, by seeing that A is usually followed by B, or if I do A, then usually B follows, you can build up a sense of understanding of what's going on in this outside world. You can theorize on what's going on. And David had a picture of a baby, but I can give an example of my 4-year-old son, who, when he was a little bit younger, he liked to draw on the white walls that we have in our house. And I think after a while, he developed this idea that if you do that, your parents turn out to be very unhappy. And maybe after a while, he became less committed to doing those things. So by observing regularities, you can infer that maybe some actions will bring you closer to a desired outcome, and then decide to implement or not implement certain actions. So this whole cycle would let people adapt to a world, achieve some goals that they would like to, and it could be all automatic. It could be happening, it is happening for very young children, for animals as well. I think we all know about Pavlov's experiments with dogs. But in more intricate situations, there is more going on. There might be multiple explanations for what we see happening. It may be that explanations that worked in the past don't work anymore. So we build up a more enduring store of things that explain what's going on in the outside world. And in psychology, there is a whole range of phenomena that refer to that. And one that has caught on in the modeling world as well is the mental model. So often it is explained by pointing to causal effects, as if the mental model is a store of causal effects that you can observe in the outside world. And later editions also talk about goals. The mental model contains the goals that one would like to achieve, and maybe also the means, the things that we can control that would help us reach those goals. And then interestingly, the mental model also has an effect on what we perceive in the outside world. There is a famous research by Herbert Simon and colleagues in which he develops a fictitious case on a piece of paper, artificial case, and he presents it to people in real organizations. And the question is always, if this is a situation of an organization, what is the most important thing happening here? What would be the first thing that a new director should attend to? And what he finds out is that if you give that fictitious case to people from the human resources department, they tend to see personnel problems. If you give it to people from the production department, they see production problems. The finance people see financial problems, and so on and so on. This is, of course, replicated. The story is a little bit more complicated than I make it out to be here, but the general sense is still there. Your background, the mental models that you have built up over time, they also have a filtering function. So all of this can go right in habitual situations or in not too complex situations, but if we enter a novel situation or something that is more complex, we can benefit from making a more explicit model of what's going on. And that could be a formal system dynamics model. You would need that to elicit what's in the mental models, to express it, to make it explicit, which also has the benefit that it can be better shared with other people. And then you can use that to understand the perceived situation in a different way. It draws attention to different things. You can also use it to test certain actions instead of, we can build better explanations and then change our decisions and ultimately even test those decisions in a formal SD model. In preparing this, I was reminded of a former British politician, was it Liz Truss, who thought you could experiment with reality, change some rules and see what the effects were. We have a new government, and probably that is going to happen here as well. They have interesting proposals, such as leaving the EU, and we'll see what happens there. But if you experiment with a model, not with the real world, it's a lot safer, and you can learn a lot before before things are changed or irrevocable. So if we have all of this, and please note that some of the arrows here in this figure are single arrows, and others, they are multiple arrows. So it means that the perceived situation, for instance, by different people could be perceived in different ways. If we in an organization or as a group have to commit to a decision, then the multiple arrows have to become one arrow somehow. So there's a phase of convergence here. And modeling can help in that respect as well. It can take those different representations, see what are commonalities between them, and then come to a joint decision. So to us, this was fairly similar to what was in the mind map, but now in a more systematic way. And what it allows us to do is to zoom in on certain aspects. And that is to us one of the core benefits of having such a more comprehensive view. And I will give 3 examples of that. And one is the mental model. As we saw, it is not about people making optimal decisions. It has all these cognitive limitations. It's not a representation of everything that's there in the real world. If you want to build a realistic model of that, then your model will be capturing that same thing. It will. I'm trying to move my bar, which is not so easy. Anyway, it will show that the decision makers that are captured in that model use the information that's available to them, and they don't make optimal decisions. They make decisions in a satisfying manner. If you then use that to build a micro world, it gives you something in addition to what people normally would use when making decisions. When people usually make decisions, they are usually quite focused on events, unexpected events. It has some emotional value. People tend to focus on the other people in the situation. They are very good as social actors, and they might forget about some other things that a formal SD model would add. So what a model would add, for instance, is behavior over time, is a more explicit causal structure to explain the things that we see happening, is an explicit description of the policies that are followed in the problem at hand. So all of that helps you to do a better job in terms of explanations and expectations. It helps you to see how the structure underlies or explains the behavior that we see in the problem, and then also helps you to understand your particular problem better. But the second example is about situations in which it doesn't seem to help, in which a formal system dynamics model seems to fall flat, doesn't help people to make better explanations and expectations. So here, what we can go into is which ways the model fails to influence interpretation, theorizing, or sense-making. And it could be for a whole host of reasons, which have been found in case studies and more experiment-based research. It may be that the terms used in the model, the variable names, do not correspond to things that have meaning for people, that are parts of their mental models. It may be that they fail to see how you should read behavior over time graphs. It may be that the group as a whole couldn't agree on what the best course of action was, or it even could be that they agreed to the structure, to the resulting behavior, that this would be a good explanation for the resulting behavior, but they feel that the proposed actions would just not work in their organization. The third example goes into the part of actions. It talks about how we come from cognitions, from people's understandings, so the contents of their mental models, to people's actions. And in social psychology, a famous theory is this one, the theory of planned behavior. And it says essentially that behavior is caused by intentions, and those are not necessarily conscious, could also be more unconscious. But more interestingly, there are 3 precursors to intentions. One is attitudes, so that's an idea on what this behavior, proposed behavior, will generate for myself, good and bad outcomes to me as a person. The second one is subjective norm, which means the ideas that I have about what others want me to do. This is quite intricate, so it's not the real norm, it's my interpretation of the group norm. And the last one is a perception of control. So this is already very interesting because, well, when I started thinking about this, I realized that if you consider the outcomes of modeling, the impact of models on, of system dynamics models on your mental models, you often tend to think that they give you a better way to realize your own goals. What this model of Eisen says is that maybe going through a whole modeling exercise, your ideas on how the situation is have not changed. But what has changed is that you now have a better understanding about what other people want. So your attitude hasn't changed, but your subjective norm might have changed. Or your control has changed. Going through the modeling exercise has given you more levers, a better understanding and grip on the situation. So it's not just ideas on means-ends relations and personal goals. It could be ideas about others or about control that change. So the model is more specific, there's more detail to it. Each of these concepts is based on beliefs, and all of these beliefs, they consist of evaluations of outcomes and then the strength of beliefs leading to those outcomes. Well, there's a lot more literature behind this who make also all kinds of assumptions on how you should measure these things. So I think it's very valuable to know this when thinking about system dynamics practice and to measure what system dynamics interventions achieve. Also, because some of the outcomes of modeling interventions that we regularly talk about, such as achieving system changes, creating commitment to proposed actions, creating consensus, changing people's mental models, all of these things, all of these concepts have an equivalent in this theory. And as I just mentioned, what it meant to me was that, for instance, mental model refinement has now suddenly become a much richer concept, not only about personal goals, but also about norms and about control. What this also means to us is that it puts into focus the idea that system analysis is not only about a mathematical representation of technical systems, such as factories, supply chains, networks, in which the people that make decisions in such systems or probably can be seen sometimes to behave as maximizers. They use logic, deliberation. They are indeed close to Homo economicus, or if not, they follow the rules which have been laid down and it seems all to work fine. But that's not the only domain that we're interested in. We're also interested in a more complex domain in social settings. And to understand what happens in such problems, you need to understand how behavior in the past has led to the situation that we are in now. So then the models that capture such situations realistically, they should also contain cognitive limitations and biases and social pressures. And it should take into consideration that people make decisions based on intuition, on heuristics, on an incomplete set of information, that they are imperfect, but they know very well how to address and deal with social situations. And it does not only work in the sense of what needs to be captured in the models. When preparing this, I was also reminded of what's in Rosenhead's book, where he says that many of the standard operational research applications, they assume that implementation is unproblematic. So they assume that there is a clear hierarchy in an organization, so that a mathematical solution to a technical problem, if it is presented in a clear business case, it can just be implemented across the whole organization. There's one person who makes a decision and the rest of the organization follows because it's so self-evident that this would work. And clearly in situations where there's more social aspects, where people have sub-goals that are not necessarily all consistent, that is a little bit more problematic. So our idea is that system dynamics should work in the above case, so we talk about relatively well-defined problems, but also in the lower case in which we talk about masses. So we think this adds to to the way in which behavior was understood in system dynamics so far. I think we are, David has mentioned, and I think we're all clear about that, that system dynamics has always been about behavior. It captures behavior, it tries to influence behavior. So we need to recognize that. It's about observing phenomena and then seeking for explanations. It links to empirical work. We need to test out our explanations and our improvements. And the benefit of a framework such as the one we just presented is that we can now have a more comprehensive idea on what could be researched. Instead of following a particular topic, such as the department store tasks, the other areas that have been popular in the past, what the model brought to me, and hopefully to David as well, is a more comprehensive idea on what we could be researching if you think about behavior and system dynamics. So turning towards a definition, drawing again on the idea that there are technical, mathematical problems as well as more social masses, we need to start from a firm acceptance that physics cannot capture all real-world problems. There are problems in which human behavior plays an important role. So therefore, we need to engage with theories and findings from those other disciplines. We need to recognize the fact that experiments, seeing what this actually means in empirical settings, is important. And in addition to that, be willing to adopt the theories which have been used in those specific fields. And I think we have a lot to add to that because we are in a model-based area. And use all of that as a sound basis for improving practice. And I can give an example of all of this. When I was trying to research effects of facilitated system dynamics of group model building, I tried to operationalize this idea that people learn from modeling interventions. I wanted to know essentially what their mental model was before and after a modeling intervention. And I turned to this theory of planned behavior. So that meant I measured attitudes and the cognitions that go with it, as well as norm, as well as control. And to my surprise, I found that while attitude and norm, they change, they go in the directions of the recommendations that are formulated in a modeling intervention, control actually did not change. And then when I tried to make sense of that, I thought, yeah, it does. Even it didn't change whether the intervention was a causal loop diagram or a full-blown simulating model. That was a bit of a surprise because particularly in simulating models, you would expect if you show people that if you change a particular variable, certain loops will kick in and then your situation will be improved, then maybe they would tend to follow that advice and also have a feeling of increased control. That turned out not to be true. So it made me rethink what we actually do in modeling interventions, at least in the way that we do them. And then I thought, yes, in the end, we do end at the very generic level of a system dynamics model. So this is indeed what we tell them. You should change this variable in that direction. We have nothing in the sense of action plans or project management or who is going to do what by which date. There's nothing on how to actually implement these recommendations that we just came up with at the end of the modeling enterprise. So maybe we should do more in that. So if I would be fully using the definition that we have here, I would have to change the group model building intervention, adding these particular aspects that focus more on control, and then test it and see if control would also be increased after group model building. But to me, that is a very clear way of looking at theories from another field, seeing how they relate to our practice and trying to improve our practice in doing so. As a conclusion, David and I thought it would be good to tell ourselves again that this will not be easy. This reminded us of the appreciative system, which was introduced by Vickers and later used by Peter Checkland. The idea that there's a flux of events and ideas, people perceive things in the outside world, they take action, things develop on the basis of that. They need to appreciate what's going on. We have been doing that in the system dynamics field using the system dynamics based insights which have been around. I think we can learn a lot from other disciplines that would help us to change our actions, improve our tools, test them, and then see how we can go through the cycle once more. And I end with slides that David can explain in more depth.
So for us, it was put very well in the play Angels in America. At the very end, a character says, you can't live in the world without an idea of the world, but it's living that makes the ideas. You can't actually wait for a theory, but you have to have a theory. And that's this sort of entangled thing that we're trying to get at with the Vickers concept. And that for us is it's a reminder of the challenge of behavioral system dynamics, that combination of living and theorizing that we're trying to add some structure to and add some contribution to. And we think that that's the challenge, and we hope you find this set of ideas that we presented this evening of interest. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much to you both. Really fascinating presentation. And
if you can click forward, Etienne, there's the page of references that people might like.
Yes,
perfect. That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Excellent.
These are in the chat as well.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks, David. So yeah, we've got quite a number of questions in the chat. So I'm going to take them in order that they've been put up. Graham, you talked about the sort of the mental models of representation in people's heads. Would you like to come on and ask your question?
Hi, yeah, thanks for that. So you're taking a particular approach within cognitive psychology that isn't the one I would have gone for, given what you're trying to do, as it were. That the balance of modeling and living, there are approaches like the embodied, extended, embedded, enactive, affective, or 4EA approach to cognition that really emphasize that kind of living side of things. So I was wondering how much we need to buy this kind of particular approach to cognitive psychology that puts a lot of the action in the head rather than in relationship to a wider social and environmental system, or if we are kind of, can we plug in a different view there if we buy the rest of your model?
David, shall I have a first go, or do you want to?
Well, you're going to get stuck. You're going to want to engage in the detail. I'm going to want to pull out and say, I think to me, that indicates success. I don't know, because I don't know some of the things that you're referring to, but to me that says that structure has been successful, because remember when we've had our definition, it was item 3 was a recognition of the value of engagement with theories and findings from other disciplines. So, we have provoked you to go, well, actually, don't you think this would be good? Or indeed, you just said, don't you think this set of ideas will be better? I don't know, but at least we're having the discussion. And one of the problems we had was behavioral the term behavioral in this sense is so different in its granularity. It can be teeny tiny things inside models. It can be how you stop people talking in group model building exercises. It can be ideas about the mind. There's this vast scope of things, and we would try to offer a framework that people could find useful to come together and raise thoughts. And you've just done that. So I think that's great. We don't need to have that discussion here. It's lovely that we provoked you to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think any theory that can provide a lens on relations or the concept that we used in that framework is fantastic. And I have to say, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the exact theory that you just mentioned, but I think anything that can shed light on the concept and relations in the map we just showed would be great. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Etienne. Ian is asking, are there libraries of behavior representations in SD? Ian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Ian asked me that. I tried to answer the chat. It's a good point, and I'm not going to take the next two questions, Etienne. Sorry. The problem we have as system dynamicists is that we use the word behavior a lot, and it doesn't mean behavior as in behavioral OR. We talk about behavior over time, and it means the trajectory, the time series, the graphs that come out of the model, the shape of things evolving over time. That's what we mean by behavior most of the time. Here we're talking about behavioral phenomena, you know, the foibles that result from foibles and fallacies. So I think my question, Ian, is what do you mean by behavior in your question?
I'd say it's the latter rather than the curve. It's the I was actually thinking back to Pat Rivette's remarks about there being, I think, 8 structures for most management problems, which makes a rather cheeky allusion back to somebody mentioned this once. I thought, yeah, it was you on national TV in 1964. But it was. But it's this idea there are some things, patterns that return again and again and again. So,
well, actually, I think that's the concept of generic structure, which is a kind of a tangent. I've just stuck something in the chat. Yeah, there are kind of we've got recurring structures which are associated with behaviors over time, and also we would now interpret them as embodying behavioral phenomena. As regards, you claimed that your question, Ian, was about the second. Is there a list of behavioral phenomena in OR? I think that's what we were trying to create. We saw disparate papers. We were trying to draw all of these together in a way that made them look like they belonged in a group. And that's in a way what this talk was trying to do. Martin, over to Etienne for the next ones.
Okay.
Len, would you like to come on and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks for the talk. And my question is, so when I got that right, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, that behavioral mechanisms also are based on the individuals within a certain context using their glasses on the world. And I was wondering if system dynamics then is able, or even how is system dynamics able to grasp that individual interpretation of the environment around them within an aggregated level? Or is it rather that maybe agent-based approaches are better in capturing these individual-based interpretations instead of system dynamics?
Well, what I think is that system dynamics models maybe not so much focus on individual decision making, but they need to say something about the policies that go with a certain decision. Maybe you could say they capture a particular role of someone in that model. It could be an individual, it could be a group, it could be whatever. But they've always tried to capture what a policy is, what goals are important to that particular flow equation, for instance, how information that arrives in that flow decision is delayed, or how and where it is drawn from elsewhere in the model. And I'm sure that you can go to a more granular level, more particular level, if you use agent-based models. Does that answer your question? Because I'm also thinking of the types of theories you could use to address this, but you are talking about particular modeling approaches, right?
Yeah, it already touches upon my question. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, so now I'm not sure whether I can pronounce the surname properly. Len Walensky is asking about archetypes and molecules. Is that, Len, are you able to come and join us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm speaking, as David and Etienne would say, from a system dynamics modeling point of view. David mentioned these behaviors over time, and there are between 6 and 8, or maybe 6 and 10 archetypes that we recognize. We recognize those patterns over time in a system, and we say to ourselves, almost, gee, I know how to model that. I have an archetype that will generate that kind of behavior over time. And then the molecules are maybe more for actual modelers. They're much smaller pieces. They're much smaller combinations of objects that those of you who know what object-oriented computing is, these are little pieces that you might use in a model if you're building a formal computer model. I'm trying to find also that last question. I think Sturman and David and Etienne, maybe you know the answer. Is it Sturman and Ramanda did a paper comparing agent-based and SD a few years back?
Yeah, exactly.
I've been scrambling to find the reference on my computer, and I can't find it. I hope that answers the question.
I think there was also a Professor Lane who wrote a paper about canonical situation models.
Mm-hmm.
I've stuck it in the chat.
Yeah.
Try to stop us going down this tangent. The issue of agent-based modeling has come up a couple of times, and I think system dynamicists are hesitant about being drawn into that kind of detail. I think there's an issue of having a parsimonious theory. You'd be surprised how far you can get with an aggregate model if you're trying to understand counterintuitive behavior, so weird trajectories over time. Quite simple models can do this. Anyway, this is a tangent. The next question that my dear Dutch colleague will respond to.
Sure. Just take them in order. David, Mike, you asked about the access to the videos. I'm sure we'll get them up very soon. Noting that Graham's presentation hasn't yet gone up, but it will as soon as we can. Maybe if Karen, you have a moment, you could just pop into the chat sort of when that might appear. That would be really useful. So, Christine, would you like to ask your question?
No, to be honest, sorry.
Got you.
Hello, Christine.
No, you're now unmuted, Christina.
I heard you briefly, but I can't hear you now.
I thought he was talking to Christine, not Christina.
Yeah, that's what I
Christine.
thought,
yeah.
Sorry, which one?
There,
Christine or Christina?
There's a Christine.
Christine.
Right.
There's two here.
Christine Tang, the next one down. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I thought. Christine Tang. Yes.
Right.
There, Christine. That's it. We can see you.
Oh no, I just had a comment, not a question in the chat.
So, is there anything you wanted to say on that, or are we?
No, sorry, I'm distracted trying to find the paper that Len was referencing.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, I'll find. All right. If it's bothering people, I'll see if I've probably got it. Yeah.
Excellent.
Right.
Benedict's question we've answered, and Christina. You talked about Graham's point.
I think that some of this is coming up in some of the papers that David's been putting up about the structure of things. So really, and to some extent, it speaks to something that Jim is saying about structuring the problem beforehand, and the control problem that Etienne was talking about towards the end. I think we need to very much work with other methods, other ways of doing things, to see how we can make sure that we're looking at the external situation and not just the things that were within the modelling situation, so that we're actually understanding the process that people have got. And I'm trying to find my actual question so that I can ask it, but I can't find it now. I can't find it anywhere in the chat. But I think it's been answered, to be honest with you, and I think it's there in David's papers. So I was just saying that we need to look at other approaches. David wrote a paper about coupling PSMs with system dynamics. I think that's just one thing that we could look at. There's also things like design thinking and design approaches. There are various different ways that we can look at the situation that is around the situation that we're modelling, so that we actually kind of move out from just looking at the hard modelling part of it. That was kind of where I was going. Not very well.
Okay, thanks, Christina. So, anything we want to add, or shall I move on to Jim?
I think what Christina mentions is quite important. I think there have been a few papers in system dynamics and in problem structural methods that talk about what the effective ingredient is There was one by David Anderson and colleagues about is it the fact that we build a very detailed representation of a problem structure that we can then simulate, or is it the fact that the management and the shop floor actually get together and talk about things, or is it the effective ingredient that we have high-level insights, like the T-shirt slogans that David mentioned, and maybe multiple of these, or maybe different ones for different audiences. So yeah, it would be really useful to engage with other literatures and other methods to see what they are doing. Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, so moving on to Jim Scholes. There's a few questions here.
Oh yeah, I've just read them. They're brilliant. Thank you for asking them.
Jim, do you want to join us and just join the discussion?
Yeah, just hang on. Can you hear me?
It's good.
Can hear you, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, it's probably enough. I don't look very pretty at the moment. I'm working in the dark, which may be obvious from the questions, but
so basically you already have your camera on. That's your position.
So bear with me one moment. I just try and make sense of this. Yeah, I first of all, that was a really helpful and thought-provoking talk. So sincere thanks. In raising 3 questions, I thought I was probably taking liberties because I know we have limited time. What struck me, I guess, with the first sort of model that I saw, I joined probably 5 minutes late, but the first model I saw was going from real world to the perceptions of that world, which of course perceptions, as you said, can only be a kind of subset, a particular slice. But what I didn't see as the model built up, I could relate to everything in the model, and as you built the detail, I could relate to it. But what I didn't really see was where the selection of the problem or problems to be addressed was taking place, and against what kind of criteria. And who exactly would make that choice.
Right, Jim, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I say that because the work that you and Peter have done had an enormous influence on me as a system dynamicist and as an operational researcher, actually as a scientist, incredibly influential. I came across it in Shell in the mid 80s, and then your book came out with all of the cases. So thank you very much for coming along. We would say that the concept of Weltanschauung is lurking there. I mean, yes, we connect real world to perceived situation, but notice the other influence there is mental models. And we say in our diagram that mental models do filtering and selecting. Right, and that's where we would try to have that discussion. So in a way, what you're doing is in the style that Etienne showed you with those examples when we opened up the boxes or opened up the arrows, we would have a discussion further about filtering, right? And say, now, is there something we can get from SSM, the different Weltanschauung, that can help us understand that filtering process? There's a bit more, well, there's actually quite a bit more in the paper where we try to define what these boxes are and what these arrows are and what we mean by them and the concepts we're trying to draw in, and we're trying to make them as commodious as possible. But that, I would happily, very, very happily stand on that arrow, open it up and say, wow, let's think about what SSM has got to contribute to that. Etienne, is that about right?
Yeah, I was typing in a reference to a paper.
Go for it.
I think yes. Yeah, I tried to write a paper for the System Dynamics conference 2 years ago about how System Dynamics deals with situations in which power differences play a role and in which conflict plays a role. And I was struck with the fact that many publications on GRU model building, including Jacques Phoenix's book, they are very clear about saying that the problem frame is something to be questioned, right? We are asked by a particular person in an organization to come and do a system dynamics intervention there. And Jacques was always quite clear in saying, if you speak to another person in that organization, they might see a different problem altogether. and you need to talk to several people to come to some sort of understanding of what the problem is. And it might also be that definition changes over the course of the modeling intervention, that you start in one area and it turns out that the real issues are in another area. So even if all of that is true, that we really question the initial problem frame, I think in the end, it is not asking all these critical questions that Ulrich would ask. Because I think in the end, we do go along with something very close to the initial problem formulation that the first person we contacted gave us. Then we invite people to the modeling meetings that might not represent all the people that have something to do with this issue. So I think a lot more work can be done. A lot more work can be done on that question that you're asking right there, using SSM, using critical system heuristics, as well as other methods. So I agree to the previous speaker. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't trying to pitch SSM, by the way.
No, it's very important.
The question I think is one maybe you will work on going forward, but in my experience in a different area, in some sense, working as a consultant, if I were to generalize, I'd say it's probably more often the case that the initial presentation of a problem, the client's presentation of a problem, isn't the problem you end up working on. Mm-hmm. So yep. I think that openness in the initial dialogue and that recognition on the client's part that this may change is probably quite important. That's fine. So it was intended as hopefully helpful input. The third question I raised about AI deployment was a little bit impish of me. But as I look at the models, I think, yeah, I can very well see AI would take over the routine and would behave very rationally. So that was just a thought.
I'll be back. It's the only thing I can think of saying there. It was I just read it. It was an impish question. I was just scratching my head. I'm going to leave it there. Since you confessed that.
Well, but it's always worth thinking about. I often get asked, will AI take over all of this wonderful stuff that we get involved in?
Well, AI is not going to be able to do. All right, I'll play. AI is not. I think AI is going to find it harder to do two things, which is, first of all, work out what is the issue behind the issue, or work out, is the issue really the issue some of you are saying it is. That strikes me as a very human skill. And one of the things that Etienne and I were trying to draw into this framework, but also think about a lot, is when you're standing in a room building a system dynamics model with people, you've got all this technical system dynamics stuff. You're also trying to deal with the fact that that guy over there keeps talking, and you need to get him to talk a bit less, though you don't want to shut him up because what he says is really good. And that woman at the back isn't saying very much at all. And is she not liking it, or is she nervous? And how do you draw her into the discussion? There's all of this really sophisticated stuff. And this is part of system dynamics. And one of the problems I think we have as a field is we tend to write up models. Right, we don't write enough about processes, and this is why I was so delighted to do this work with Etienne, because the group at Nijmegen just does this stuff. It does the process and then reflects on the process. The second thing, Jim, I don't know whether AI will be able to tackle, is coming up with the innovative solutions or the innovative interventions, thinking about the policy levers, looking at a behavior over time trajectory, and having the brilliant idea, hey, what would happen if we did this? We could try that. Because all of us, I think this is the thing about the models don't represent reality, or they're at least certainly not a complete representation of reality. All of us have had experiences in which people use a model and it turns into this creative tool, this sidekick, right, as it's called in the literature, as people kind of go, hey, we could do this. And they come up with something which isn't in the model, right, but which you can kind of interpret using the model, or at least the model has provoked you to think of it, and the group go, yeah, that's it, that's the solution, and that spark of creativity. I would hope we're not going to be well outreached on that yet. I don't know. I'm close to retirement, so I don't much care. But I think those two things, finding the real problem and the innovative solution, is something where we can still do something really, really good.
So I urge you to work more on the Weltanschauung, or beyond mental models in some sense, because I think that's the space that is important in exactly the dynamic you're describing.
Okay, noted. Thanks.
And I think you can probably see me, but probably not for too long. I'm about to disappear again.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Jim. That's brilliant.
Okay.
So
more messages.
Next, we've got Alkaios. Would you like to join us, Alkaios?
Hi.
Hi there.
I attend this event because I working on MCD SD approach, multi-criteria analysis with decision making and system dynamics. And I found the paper of David and Etienne very useful, but I cannot understand what by this framework you are trying to model. What you mean by behavioral? What kind of granularity we have to go to the modeling approach to have some results that managers and organizational decision makers can use? That's my from all the paper. I didn't understand where the behavioral, at what level of complexity it stands.
Okay, Etienne, do you want to take that?
I can make a start. I think that's part of the definition of behavioral OR and behavioral system dynamics that has puzzled me from the beginning. In my mind, it's about two things. It's about capturing behavior in models. That is something that system dynamics has been doing for a long time. It's also about how models interact or influence behavior. So the level of granularity, well, I think in the model in the framework that we presented, I think we went into mostly into the second question. So if you were using a model to influence behavior, which aspects does that have? Where can you make that connection? And then it could be very fine grained. It could be more on a generic level. There's lots of different areas of research that have a relevance to this. Research on management flight simulators, so serious games, as well as research on how a modeling process, a participative process, influences people's ideas. But the other part that you might also be thinking of is how do you capture human behavior in models? And then we come to these topics which were discussed at the beginning of the discussion part today about archetypes. So there have been recurring attempts, recurring topics in system dynamics models for which some sort of standard solutions have been found. For instance, how to model a perception delay. David, did that make any sense?
Yeah, well, I think it's no that hey, that it made sense to me, but I'm probably the worst person to ask. But to engage with Alkaios's question, I guess what we were trying to do, and maybe we haven't done it that well, in which case, do better, exceed us. What we were trying to do was say there is this vast area of stuff which we can think of as being behavioral phenomena, times when people don't kind of do what seems to be sensible, rational, right? But it is this extraordinary range of granularities. It's all the way from dealing with people in a room building a model to representing Herbert Simon's bounded rationality within a model. And we just were trying to make some sense. We were trying to move beyond that mind map to something which would help us, which would look like a system dynamics intervention, which is what those boxes that Etienne presented are, and would provoke people to locate their funny behavioral phenomena there, and then associate it with some other theories or some other phenomena. That was the idea, which is why perhaps the most important word in the paper is the first word of the title, towards. Yeah, we're just trying to move into this area and add some structure, some notion, some framework for thinking about this. It feels like there's a rat scrabbling around on somebody's microphone. It's not me. Right.
So if I understand correctly, this approach goes both ways. If we model a behavior that we see in the data, then we can make this behavior we see on the data, we can make it to make better the decision process by showing the modeling process, and make it open loop procedure, the modeling process. You don't have open your microphone.
I think that's about, thank you. I think that's about right. Someone in the chat, oh yes, a John, Jon, said, what are the main implications on applications to daily problems? Good question, which I'm not going to answer, except I am going to say it is the main thing we want to answer, because one of our slides, you know, our definition, point 5, is an absolute commitment to the previous points, but as a sound basis for improving practice. None of this stuff is about discussing how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, or at least if we're doing that, it's to go out and then do something in the world. Both Etienne and I are interested in improving practice, and we wouldn't be doing this if it was just a kind of an intellectual debate. It's about ultimately doing these various things better. So I think we are together on that one. Hope that answers. Yeah, and Etienne is nodding. That's good. Martin, do you have any more queued up? You said you had a lot.
There's quite a few. Yeah, just
okay.
in view of time, I think it's good to get through them. So if I nip down to Jeff Royston, Jeff, do you want to just come on and ask your question?
I think Jeff might have gone because he says I have to leave at the beginning of the question. So
yeah. Okay. Oh, he's left now. Yeah. Okay.
Oh dear.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Shame.
Yeah, pity. Okay.
That's a pity.
So we've got quite a few responses to things, not so many direct questions, unless I've missed.
I'm trying to throw stuff into the chat as I see it, and so is Etienne. But are we going to get away with it then? Right.
Yeah, I think there's quite
complimenting you. Actually, I think that seems to be what the general gist of that comment was. I think you're doing good work. Keep up the good work. Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, and a vote of thanks to the OR Society from Len Malczynski, who is far away in Texas and an excellent system dynamicist. That's nice. It's really nice.
Thank you for coming, Len.
Yeah, well, a number of people did. I mean, Christine, Rogelio Oliva are here, and these are not, I don't think they're members of the Operational Research Study. And Rogelio, I remember, was confused about how he got here. You know, he sent me some emails about this. How do I know about this? You know, and he thinks he got it from LinkedIn. So there's a message here for the OR Society about, you know, spreading this thing out as widely as possible and getting the numbers right.
Yep.
Oh yes, and Christine is correcting me. Christine is in Texas. Yes, of course. Len is in New Mexico. He's in Albuquerque. Thank you, Christine.
Excellent. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. So thanks to David and Etienne for a wonderful presentation. Thanks everyone for all your questions and all the discussion. I think it's been absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share our ideas. Come up with better ones. We will too. Thank you.
This is the conversation we need, isn't it? Yep.